Hello everybody, Bob Lusk here checking in with you. Get my little music going for you here. Maybe, or maybe not. Oh, there it is. Here we go.
Let's do it now. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss.
I need somebody with technical support in here to help me sometime.
So much fun. Well, I woke up this morning and I headed for
Pond Boss Resource Guide.
Meet Mr. Pond Boss. Yeah, we're
Pond Boss Magazine.
So
here we go. Hey, let's talk about how to raise trophy largemouth bass. You know, I was talking to my buddy Bruce Condello up in Lincoln, Nebraska. You know, the big bluegill guy with bigbluegill.com. He looks at bass as a trash fish. He looks at them as ways to control numbers of bluegill to grow big bluegill. Now, here in my part of the planet, in Texas, it is standard fare for a landowner to call me and say, "Hey, I want to grow the biggest largemouth bass on the planet." You know, and you got to credit where credit's due. You know, you're looking back in the '60s, and largemouth bass was just another fish until Ray Scott started BASS. And when that thing kicked in gear, a whole new industry was created. You know, and if we're going to talk about raising trophy largemouth bass, there's a lot of angles to come from, because the current world record, they're tied. There's one that was caught in 1932 in Georgia, George Perry. You know, I think it was 22 pounds and 3 or 4 ounces. And then one recently caught in Japan just a few years ago. So we're going to be talking about, and you know, the world record has stood. I mean, I live in Texas. It's the world record, the state record here is 18.18 caught in January of 1992. Holy cow, that's 26 years ago. So growing huge largemouth bass is not the easiest thing to do. So we're going to talk about some of the finer points and see what we can learn, share a little bit of knowledge with you, do a little housekeeping while I wait for this thing to kick on my laptop so I can see your questions and see who all's on board. I tell you what, you guys are going to be tickled to death with this. You know, we have several regular guys that come on and watch this show, and I love it. I love it. Daniel Powell is one of those guys. He won the cap and mug. So if you want a shot at winning a cap and mug, here's the mug. Here's the hat. Here's what I want you to do. Click like, and in the comments section, Pond Boss, hashtag Pond Boss Magazine, and then share this video on your timeline. Share it with your friends so we can keep building a good audience and see if we can get the numbers up. And just, you know, my main thing is to share knowledge with people. That's what I really want to do. And sell subscriptions to Pond Boss Magazine. $35 a year. Cheaper than a Friday night date. And well worth it. Get a lot out of it. And you know, Pond Boss is a go-to source for all kinds of knowledge. Mike Otto's book, Just Add Water. This is 40 years worth of his experiences tied up in these pages right here. There's even pictures. Some great photos. Then we have another book. This is if you want to build a lake, some of the finer things about that. Here's one called Perfect Pond. Want one? This takes you from everything on how to buy land, make a plan, and build a pond. You know, especially it's centered more on fishing ponds. So let me see here if this video is up, and I'll start greeting people and see what we got going on here. Oh, yep, there it is right there. Here we go. So now I'm going to blow it up where I can see it. Turn the speaker off so we're not listening to two sides of the voices here. Click to enlarge. Here we go. Jack Hamilton. Let's see here. Jack Hamilton, hi. Hey, man, glad you're on. Kevin Briggs, Jim Fritch. And this is 3 other people. Now it's not telling me who they are. Sweet. Let me see who we got now. We got Mike Muley on board. Leanne ain't even left office yet. She's still sitting over there in her office paying attention. Anthony Abate. You got your hat and mug. Well, show it off. Let us see. Oh, wait. It's a one-way broadcast, isn't it? Jim Fritchie, Kevin Briggs. Okay, Joshua Woods. Hello, hey, Pond Boss. Hey, Joshua Woods. How are you, buddy? Jacob West. Tell us about big bass. You're going to know firsthand about big bass, Jacob West. I see that coming. Troy Todd, Brian Lawrence, Doug Biggs checking in from Virginia. I love it. Matt Arrington, great topic tonight. It's going to be fun. Scott Lindsay, glad you guys are on board. Sweet. We got about 20 people. That's a good audience to get started off on this Wednesday evening. I'm glad we're all skipping church together. Let me start off. Here's a little question here. I think I'll circle back on this question. Chris Krivalovic, I think I pronounced that right. Sweet. He says, I can't make the show tonight, or can't make the show again, but would like to ask what size northern bass is too big to transfer to another pond. I have a 250-gallon tank with a bubbler in it. What that means is he's got a way to transport fish. He says there'll be a half-hour drive time and 1 to 2 hours to catch the fish. Should I ice down the holding tank or use the water out of the small pond? How many fish should I put in the tank if they're 6 to 12 inches? What if they're 14 to 16? You know what? I'm going to go ahead and knock that out. Would be going from a small pond to a very large one. Both are private waters, private ponds. Okay, here's the thing about that. If you choose to transport fish, sometimes I'm opposed to transferring fish, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. Sometimes I'm all for it, and I'll tell you why here in just a minute. But a 250-gallon tank, good gosh, you can carry, I'm going to tell you, 40 pounds of fish in there for, 41-pound fish or 80 half-pound fish. Use the water out of the small pond. Don't ice it down too much, because if you change the temperature more than 10 degrees, you'll distress those fish. There's a little tip that you won't hear very, very many places. Let's see, what if they're 14? Yeah, 80, just go by that 40-pound mark for 250 gallons of water. Be sure they're sealed good. Now listen, they're going to get crazy when you get ready to unload them. So have it, when you raise that lid up after you've got them loaded, they're going to flush. And when they do, they're going to start jumping everywhere. So just raise the lid up a little bit, then shut it down. Raise it up a little bit and just watch. And when they flush, be ready to shut the lid down on them. Now, here's what I like about transferring fish. If you want to move some fish into a mature pond in order to change the genetics and let those fish breed with your existing fish, that's a good idea. But if you don't transfer fish just because one pond needs it and the other one may not. Here's the way I tell people, the way I look at it, is don't be moving fish from a pond that deserves them into a pond that doesn't need them, or vice versa. If you've got a pond that's working good and you just need to harvest a few of the excess bass, that's okay. But if that pond that's going to receive them doesn't need them, don't do it. Now here's another little tip. Once a bass hits about 2 pounds or bigger, they're very conditioned into that environment where they grew up. So if you get ready to take them out and move them into another environment, even if it's a better one, they may not make that conversion. I'm going to tell you 25 to 30% that you've transferred from one pond to another will thrive. 25% are going to be average or just stay the same. The rest are going to decline. So I'd be paying attention to that if you're going to do it. Let's see here. We got, Tim Johnson. Hey, boss, I need help with what to plant around my pond. No cover around the bank. Well, that's pretty important when it comes to trophy largemouth bass as well, because you need all kinds of habitat. So let me just start the topic with that. You've heard me say this before, for those of you that watch this show. As goes the habitat, so goes what lives in it. And if you're going to grow trophy bass, you got to have two really, really important things. Habitat is the most important, followed right behind it by the food chain. If you don't have the right kind of food chain to feed all your fish in all the stages, and that's going to be one of the cool things I talk about tonight, are the stages, then you're not going to have a successful fishery. So some of that perimeter grass and peripheral plants that you need to be, you need to accomplish several goals. One is you want to minimize erosion. So to that end, you want some grasses and some vegetation planted along the edge and beyond. So you want turf grass or, natural grasses, prairie grasses or whatever, growing on the dry land, but down at the interface between the dirt and the water, some good bog plants. I like, depending on the part of the planet you're in, use plants that are native to your area. Here in Texas, Louisiana, southern Arkansas, going back to the southeast, I love things like Louisiana irises, arrowhead. I love maiden cane. There's all kinds of perimeter plants that are bog plants, kind of like wetland plants that really, really thrive. Then as you get out in deeper water, you want some kind of your native aquatic plants that are rooted. My favorite's American pondweed, or Vallisneria is a good one. That's eelgrass. There's a number of really, really good plants that you can use. Now, the main thing is don't use exotic plants that can get out of hand and outcompete the native plants. So do a little homework on that. Danny Tolliver is on board. He says, I need advice on the bullheads that have invaded my pond. Anything I can do to control them? Yeah, you need something big enough to eat them, like some bigger bass. Bigger bass will, and I've watched it many, many, many times. You know, bullheads are common in almost every watershed in the United States, especially east of the Rocky Mountains. So you're going to have bullheads likely. Now, once you have a good, well-balanced fishery where you have lots of bass, lots of bluegill, the bass will start chowing down on those bullheads. And bullheads only live about 3 years or 4 years, so they don't live very long, you know, compared to other fish. So once the bass can get ahead, they'll stay ahead. It just might take them a couple of years to catch up. Now, if you got an issue right now, start feeding them. Go. And this sounds kind of weird, I know, feed the bullheads, but feed the bullheads. And then build a trap, and call me later at the office. I'll tell you how to do that. But I'm going to give you a little tip right now. If you go buy some like a 1/2-inch welded wire, make a cylinder, and one end you block it with welded wire, or what do they call it? Oh, good gosh, hardware cloth. And then make a cone that goes down inside your cylinder on the other end with a hole about this big around. You can build a trap. And if you get them on feed, you start feeding them, then you can bait your trap with fish food that you're feeding them, and you can trap a bunch of them that way. So that's a good way to do it. Let's see. Jason Nepstad's on board. Dion Myers. Colin Pearson, still at work. Can't wait to rewatch. Hey, dude, you're on the clock. I love that. Okay, so now let's go on from the habitat comment. You know, it's very common for me to get a call from somebody that says, hey, I heard about you. I heard you can grow some big bass. That's what I want to do. I want to grow the biggest bass anywhere. Well, it all starts with habitat. And I might go look at that lake that's mostly completed, and they do have prime habitat for huge largemouth bass. So, you know, you guys that are anglers, if we had a one-on-one conversation, I know what you'd tell me. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to go out and try to find the fish. And where you're going to start is you're going to start off of points where there's some kind of structure, fishing shallow depending on the temperature, and then going deep. That's big bass territory. Let's see here. Nick Foster from Outdoor Water Solutions. You know, and I tell you what, in a lot of the trophy bass lakes we manage, we have aeration systems. And Outdoor Water Solutions is one of the good vendors with Pond Boss Magazine. Which reminds me, we've got 2 cool sponsors now that are actually on board as sponsors of this show. I'm proud of it. Texas Hunter Feeders, Texas Hunter Products. Go to TexasHunterProducts.com and check them out. They've got everything from road feeders for deer to deer blinds to all kinds of different kinds of fish feeders. Outstanding products. And in those feeders, I like to use Purina Aquamax fish foods. Now they've got Aquamax MVP nowadays, which is 9 different pellet sizes to feed different sizes of fish. I love that feed because it's designed to feed little bitty fish, medium-sized fish, bigger fish, primarily bluegills, which is the backbone of the food chain in every trophy bass lake that I work on. So thank you for those sponsorships from Purina Mills and Texas Hunter Feeders. And if you want more information about them, you can go to their website or come talk to me about it because I've used both those products. Actually, I got to help Purina Mills develop some of their fish foods back in the 90s going into the mid to late 2000s when they finally got the feeds this tweaked and changed and the right vitamin package and the right, you know, all the different ingredients. And it's good stuff. I use it at my house all the time too. I've got a bunch of ponds at my house where we feed fish. So the habitat's a big, big deal. But when I go look at these lakes and I see habitat that's mostly designed for big bass, then, you know, none of us, we don't know what we don't know. So when I sit down and start talking to guys, I say, you know, it takes 10 pounds of bait fish for a bass to gain a pound. Well, if we're going to get a bass to grow to be 10 pounds, he's got to eat 100 pounds of bait fish. Well, we got to produce those. We have got to produce those. So you got to think about habitat for those smaller fish as well. Now, how much habitat's enough? Brad Rom, hello from Ohio. Hi, Brad. Glad to see you, buddy. How much habitat's enough? Well, here's kind of an old axiom, and I firmly believe this. In most ponds, 90% of the fish are going to live in 10% of that pond on any given day. Now, here's the catch. that 10% changes. You know, those schooling bass may live over here in this piece. Those bluegill may be all clumped together in a beaver lodge up in the upper part of the pond. You know, all the big bass, there might be one over here, one over there, because they're solitary. And I'm going to talk a little bit about their behavior as well. So you've got to have diversity of habitat. Now think about habitat for a trophy bass lake from 2 or 3 different perspectives. One is you want to attract your biggest bass to habitat you can find as an angler that's going to be attractive to that fish. You know, because if you can grow that bass and you can't ever catch it, what difference does it make? You know, I can bring my electrofishing boat over there and find it probably and show it to you. And then if you still can't catch it, what difference does it make? So you do need habitat for big bass. You got to remember that the big bass have different habits than smaller bass. And I'm going to take you through that here in a minute. You know, so then, but you also got to have the right kind of habitat for those little bitty bait fish as well, which they like dense habitat. They like dense cover, vegetation, brush piles, cedar trees. The problem with cedar trees, they don't last very long. Jack Hamilton says, I have a Texas Hunter feeder for 2 years. It's worked great. Ran out of purine as MVP. I love that spell check too. Putin. Yeah, he's been in the news. MVP, I had to use a cheap one. My fish would not even eat it. There is a difference. There is a difference on that fish food. I'm glad you brought that up, Jack. The Purina's fish food is fish meal based. It's really palatable. I remember a number of years ago, there was a new feed that came out, gangbusters. I can't remember who produced it, but the protein content was higher, but the protein sources were different, and it was put together with chicken fat rather than fish oil. The fish wouldn't eat it. You know, so Purina has helped solve that issue. Brian Lawrence, been hoping American pondweed would get started naturally, but so far only rush and primrose. Better leave the primrose till other plants start, or go ahead and start spraying it. Oh, you know, on that primrose, Brian, if it bugs you, spray it. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. Now, the thing about primrose is it can go out 25 or 30 feet and impede your ability to access your pond. John Funk, hello from mid-Michigan, reminding everybody, because we have some new guys coming on here tonight, looks like, hashtag Pond Boss Magazine, click like, and share this video with your timeline and your friends. If you do that, you'll be in for the drawing. The drawing is for a Pond Boss hat. We do one every week. And the Pond Boss mug right there. This week's winner, Daniel Powell. Hey, Daniel, I know you're going to see this later on. You're at work, or you're actually at church tonight, which is good. I love that. Now, once we got the right habitat, another thing that's going to really be interesting. Hey, John Wilson, you're not at the ball game tonight, buddy. Glad you're here to join us. The thing about habitat underwater for raising trophy bass is, remember that habitat is a community. And the community is this. It's the different forage fish that you choose at different stages of their life. Now, bluegill are the backbone of every trophy largemouth bass lake that we have under management. So we depend on bluegills. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you about bluegills, and I'm going to start off in the south, move to the Midwest, then come to the north, and then the northeast. So you'll see what I'm talking about. The bluegill here, where we are, and I'm talking about, say, North Texas through parts of Oklahoma, southern Arkansas, then bend down and going, through part of Tennessee, and then south and east. Bluegill will spawn at least 4 times a year. Now, where we are, they may spawn 5, and then further south you go, you'll get as many as 5 spawns, kind of a rolling spawn, we call it in the fisheries industry. And what that essentially means is that we have a lot of baby bluegills coming on all through the season. Now, in the Midwest, there may be 2 or 3 spawns, and in the northern part of the country, totally different. There may only be 1, sometimes 2 spawns. So bluegill in the north may not be the best go-to fish to grow big largemouth bass. Now, I'll tackle the north in a minute. I want to look at you guys through a little bit different eyes. Gina McCrae from North Carolina, tell your husband hello too. Glad you're on board with us. The community underwater is going to be made up and evolving all the time of the different forage fish that are reproducing, then get eaten, then reproduce some more as the bass grow, and they spawn, and some of them get eaten. So, now, some of the, hey, Mike Rivers, glad to see you on board, buddy. everything starts with the food chain. So if let's say we're going to have a brand new lake and we want to grow trophy largemouth bass. Let's define trophy. Trophy largemouth bass is bigger than the one you've ever caught. So some guys I talk to, a 5-pound bass is a true trophy. Other guys I talk to, no, it's got to be 8. And then there's those that are just dead set to grow as many double-digit bass as they can. Now that's a whole nother ball game. The things that you want to think about, and ask questions. If you got some questions, throw them at me, especially about tonight's topic, raising trophy largemouth bass. Do you have, with the fishery, you have job 1 to me, which is you've got to take your bass from 0 to 16 inches as fast as you can. If you can do that, then you're going to stand a pretty good chance of growing some big fish. Now in the South, you can take bass from a fingerling up to 16 inches. A 16-inch bass should weigh 2 pounds and 4 ounces. So to get to a 2-pound bass, you're looking at 18 months in a prime habitat with plenty of food. Okay? So that's job 1. Now, when you're talking about it like I am, it sounds kind of easy, but it's not. When that pond is first stocked, the stocking rate you choose is going to have an impact on your end game. The American Fisheries Society books tell you to stock bass at 50 to the acre for ponds you're not going to manage very much. Or you can stock them up to 100 per acre if you're going to manage that pond. Well, in order to get truly trophy largemouth bass, it also turns into a little bit of a numbers game. And we've got, I think, 6 lakes now that we're trying this experiment on. Here's what we did with these 6 lakes that range in size from about 6 acres up to 25 acres. We doubled up on the forage fish when we stocked. So in other words, we stocked 2,000 bluegill with some red ear sunfish, 20 pounds of fathead minnows per acre. And then we started to feed those fish. Got to get a drink. So we fed those fish so we could get some size on them so they could start to reproduce. Then we came in with 200 largemouth bass per acre. Now here's what we did there. We stocked on some of the lakes, we stocked F1 tiger bass only, but other lakes we stocked half F1s and half Floridas. Because if you want to grow double-digit bass, you pretty much have to use Florida bass. Now, or have some Florida genetics. Maybe not necessarily pure strain Florida bass, but you've got to have Florida strain or Florida genetics in those fish if you want to grow a really huge bass. Now, if your trophy bass is 6 pounds, 7 pounds, maybe even 8 pounds, you can do that with northern bass as long as they have the right nourishment. Now, going back to the stocking rates, on these experimental ponds, here's what my thinking was. It sits on my shoulders. If this don't work, it's on me. If it does work, okay, we'll give credit to the landowner. So there's Tom Davis. Hey, Tom, glad you're on board, buddy. Those 200 fingerlings, little bitty ones, about 2 inches when they're first stocked, half of those are boys, half of them are girls. I don't expect a male to get any bigger than about 2 pounds in a pond, in a private pond, no matter what. So that there's 100 that aren't going to make it. Then there's another 100 that are females. Of those, experience of doing this 39 years suggests that about 25 to 30% of those fish are going to grow faster than the rest with the aggressive nature and maybe the opportunity to grow huge. Then there's going to be another 20-25% that grow a little slower that probably have the best potential to reach double-digit size. So we want to preserve that 50%, which is the top 50%. And what you'll see after about the 3rd year is, in fact, that happens. So what we started doing on these lakes is after the 3rd year in every lake, we're planning on culling fish so they don't overeat the food chain, because by that time, the adults, the fish that have grown up in the pond, are reproducing, and now we got hundreds of bass that need to be culled, that need to be taken out so they don't compete for the food chain at the very base, where the little bitty newly hatched fish are coming off. We want those newly hatched fish to make it, especially bluegills, to make it, 40 days, 45 days. If we can do that, they go from 12,000 per pound as a fry up to 30 per pound as a meal. So that's part of our goal when we start culling. So in these lakes that we've overstocked a little bit, we started culling some of the males and underperformers after 18 months. So, and we did that with the electrofishing boat because it's non-biased. And these landowners, they don't mind paying for it because, you know, if you're gonna try to grow trophy bass, you're gonna put some dollars in it. But to kind of put that in perspective, if you want to have your own 8 to 10 acre trophy bass lake, your other choice is to go spend 80 grand on a tricked out bass boat, and you can't pull it behind that $30,000 pickup you got. You got to go get a $60,000 pickup. So you got 140 grand and 2 pieces of equipment, and you got to pay a launch fee. You got to wait in line. Somebody's going to be fishing in your hole, and what's the odds you're going to catch a big fish? Not high. You know, so, you know, spending 15 grand, 20 grand or something like that on an 8 or 10 acre lake to try to turn it into a really trophy bass fishing lake is not unreasonable when you look at it from that perspective. Let's see, Anthony Abate, what size, length, and weight would be considered a trophy in the north versus the south? In the north, I'm going to tell you a largemouth bass that kicks past 6 pounds is probably a trophy. And just like what I said earlier in the broadcast, is a trophy to you may be different than a trophy to me. You know, I mean, I've held many double-digit bass that we've electrofished over the years, and the hair on my neck still stands up. You know, I get a chill in my spine because I know the odds. I know the odds of that fish getting there. And let me share that with you. The odds of a bass that's hatched in any given lake or pond is greater than you or I get struck by lightning. You know, and that's if you think about that, that's pretty awesome because let's say a female bass lays 50,000 eggs. Well, 25,000 of those can disappear now because they're boys. 25,000 girls. But the very best of the best have got to survive. And in an existing pond, there's probably a 1 in 20 million chance of that happening. So that's why it's most important, if you're going to start managing for trophy bass, to count on those first stocked fish that you put in. There's Leo Wynn checking in from sunny California. Greg Grimes, Ball Ground, Georgia. Glad to see you guys. Greg is Lake Works. He's in the pond management, a well-known, highly respected fisheries biologist himself. And Leo, my gosh, Leo, he's got way more knowledge than anybody will ever know about because he kind of keeps it to himself. But when you talk to Leo, that guy's brilliant. So now, a trophy bass in the south, people turn their heads in the south at a double-digit fish. They really do. You know, a 10-pound bass, 11-pound bass, those are still pretty rare, so they turn heads. But in the north, if you're in upstate New York and you catch a bass that weighs 7 pounds, you're bragging about it. That's going to be on the news. You know, a 6-pound bass there. I'm going to tell you that in Nebraska, they don't care. They want big bluegill. So a trophy bass there. I mean, I've seen some big bass in Nebraska. Bruce Condello has raised some in that rock pit back there that are double digits. He just doesn't talk about it, so I'm not going to talk about it. Dave Glover, hey man, another fisheries biologist. Matter of fact, he got his PhD studying about largemouth bass. He's the one that ought to be doing this clinic. I want to meet you, Dave, talk to you one of these days, and I want to talk shop with you, man. That'd be fun. So back to the topic of trophy bass. Job one is to get your best bass to 16 inches as fast as you can. If you can do that in 18 months, you're knocking on the door of a home run. Now, that's pretty fast, although Greg Grimes will chime in probably and says, hey, we do that. And he does in Georgia. We do that quite a bit in Texas as well. So what we want to do, now here's the thing. Once a bass hits about 16 inches, it is on the cusp of growing to where it can dominate that whole fishery. Mark Dauber, good gosh, checking in from Alabama. Good to see you, buddy. Depth of water to put artificial structures in. In private waters, Danny Tolliver, he wants to know how deep to put artificial structure. Put it in anywhere from 0 to about 7 or 8 feet. Now, it depends on the goals. If you want to try to congregate and take care of some good small bait fish, put it in shallow water. If you want to try to congregate some bass, put it in water 5 to 8 feet deep where it's still 2 to 3 feet below the surface. So now, we talked about habitat. Let's talk about food chain a little bit. In order to grow some really trophy bass, you've got to feed those young bass, get them up big enough to where the top 25 or 30% can become the dominant fish in that chain. And they're going to be females, they're going to be aggressive, they're going to be fairly fast growing. That's the three things that happen in a trophy bass pond. So what we're trying to do is to manage to get those fish there as fast as we can. Now, how do we do that? We start off a brand new pond with fathead minnows because they can reproduce exponentially. Now, keep in mind, after you stock bass, fathead minnows are going to be gone within 18 months to 2 years. So that's their job. That's the sole job they got, is to take a little bass fingerling, get it up to here where it can start eating baby bluegills. That's the fathead minnows' job. Then the bluegills take over. Their job is to feed bass to go from about, 5 inches up to 13 or 14 inches. At that point, you need to have some bigger bait fish. So in the South, you can use threadfin shad. In Texas, we use tilapia. We use tilapia to take pressure off of the bluegills so we can have more bluegills going into the winter, which I'll talk about tilapia another time. Now, this is going to be a little controversial for the fisheries biologists out there, although I think most guys would agree with this. To really grow true trophy bass, big bass, you got to have big bait fish. So after we have at least 25 to 30% of the mass of bass, 3 pounds and up, then we stock gizzard shad. Because now, here's why you don't want to do it before that. Gizzard shad can become a problem. They reproduce 250,000 to 500,000 eggs at a time, and they grow really, really fast. I got a good article coming up in Pond Boss, this next issue, that will cover that. Paul Alexander, howdy. Dave Glover, the biggest problem I encountered was throw it back and let it get bigger. How important do you think harvest is? Harvest is the deal breaker or the deal maker in a trophy bass lake. So I'm glad you asked that. I'll go into some detail about that. On the food chain, in order to grow really trophy largemouth bass, you got to have diversity. You got to have some bait fish that are small, and you have some that are a little bit bigger. And then when you're trying to, once you get those bass up at 3.5 pounds, that's when they'll turn around and start eating the bass that you're culling. And they love big gizzard shad, 9-10-inch gizzard shad. So I'll say this: every trophy bass lake we have under management has gizzard shad, or will have when the fishery is primed for that. So there's kind of a few tips on the food chain. Now let's to kind of put a little bit more order to this conversation. Habitat is the number one key to the success of every lake, every trophy bass fishery, every big bluegill fishery. If you've got the right kind of habitat to support that fishery, then chances are much, much higher that fishery is going to thrive. The next thing is the food chain. If you don't have the right food chain, then you're not going to grow the fish that you want to grow to the sizes you want to grow. Then you got to get into the genetics. We've talked about that. If you want to grow truly double-digit fish, you got to have Florida genetics. Now, here's the catch-22 with Florida genetics. If you draw a line, say from just south of Oklahoma City, maybe 50 miles south of Oklahoma City, cutting across near Little Rock, Arkansas, Memphis, Tennessee, Nashville, that area. South of that line, Florida bass can make it pretty well. Now, this is my 39th year as a fisheries biologist, and I've seen 2 times where we've had these Arctic cold fronts come in and send water temperatures plummeting and kills Florida bass. Now, in my opinion, this is an opinion based on experience, I don't think it's how cold the water gets, it's how quick the water gets cold. Because what happens if they go from 55-degree water temperature to 33-degree water temperature in 4 or 5 days, it slows their metabolism rate so slowly that they'll actually sink to the bottom and lay on their sides. And after a few days of that, they'll stop breathing. And what happens when you stop breathing? You'll float, and they do too. The fourth is really one of the backbones of growing trophy largemouth bass, and that's harvest. If you don't harvest fish, you don't grow trophy bass, period. You have to have a harvest plan. Now, I got to tell you, the Fred Bingaman, hey Fred, Paul Alexander, howdy, good to see you guys. I remember a conversation I had with Bill Dance a few years ago. I was in Memphis. He had actually called me and said, hey, when are you going to be back over here? And I told him. So I was able to sit down and visit with him a little bit. And he said, when you're designing a lake, he says, where do you put the habitat for all the fish? I said, well, Bill, on most lakes, I look at the perimeter of the lake and down to about 5 feet. He said, do you ever put any in deeper water? And I said, no, I don't. Hey, Ben Strange, good to see you, buddy. He says, hey, back. And so I said, why? He says, well, he said, I love to fish Kentucky Lake. He said, and what I do over there, he says, I'll look on my depth finder. When I find some underwater humps that I know there are fish around, I'll start fan casting with different baits till I can get a strike. He says, and you won't catch anything around the shore. And I said, you got a good point, because earlier I said 90% of the fish are going to live in 10% of your pond, and that 10% changes. So you want diversity of habitat, and so then he said, okay, now, he said, I've stopped catching my biggest bass. I said, okay, well, what are you harvesting? What's your harvest limits? He said, well, we've begun taking out as many, we started off taking out as many bass 14 inches and under as we can. So here's what I'm going to tell you guys. Once you're after your third year, the mission is going to be twofold on harvest. You want to harvest fish that are underperforming, that were originally stocked, which are going to be about the same size as the young of the year from last year's hatch. So those, you want to preserve the best of the best originally stocked fish for as long as they're alive. So your culling is going to take place of fish younger than they are or underperformers. So harvesting 20 pounds per acre per year. And in order to figure that out, weigh and measure as many fish as you can. And if you need an Excel spreadsheet to plot your fish on, email me. Just email info@pondboss.com. Here you go. Got a little graphic right there for you. info@pondboss.com. If you haven't subscribed to the magazine, do it. $35. What I'm telling you tonight is worth $35. But we'll throw in a subscription for that free $35 for learning all this stuff tonight. But if you'll send me an email at info@pondboss.com, I'll send you that Excel spreadsheet where you can plug your fish in. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky with trophy bass. You don't want to just cull every fish you catch. You want to be selective about it. You want to leave the best of the best young of the year. So if you catch a bass, that's a year and a half old, 3 years into your project, your program, and that fish has got a relative weight of 110 or 120, throw it back. If you're catching fish that are average or slightly below, take those out. And this Excel spreadsheet graph will show it. So, hey, there's Chris Blood, Texas Hunter. Hey, I was just telling them about Texas Hunter sponsorship, Chris. We appreciate you guys sponsoring this show. Buy Texas Hunter products. They're good stuff. That's all we use. Hey, Dave Glover says, so many people don't understand how good bass are to eat. You know what? There's a ceviche recipe that we got from Chris Blood's wife, Mary, that is great with largemouth bass. You go catch a 12, 14-inch largemouth bass, fillet it, and make ceviche. Of course, everybody in the South, Louisiana, they're going to make gumbo. They're going to fry it. Which I'm okay with that too. So it's okay to eat bass. You have permission to do that. Now, here's where I was with Bill Dance. So Bill said, early on we harvested those 12 to 14-inch bass, and then we just kept raising our harvest limit. Now we're taking out every bass 4 pounds and smaller. I said, there's your problem. He said, what do you mean? I said, of those 4-pound bass that you guys are taking out, are they males or females? He said, I bet they're male or females. I said, you're right. They are. They're girls. You're taking your junior varsity. So don't be culling those bigger fish like that and I just leaned over his desk and said, hey, Bill, a 4-pound bass will not grow to 8 pounds in a skillet. He died laughing. He said, can I use that on my show? I said, heck yeah, you can use that on your show. And he did, and gave me credit. But the bottom line is you want to preserve the best of your best and cull those. Now, that's where you got to use a little bit of judgment when you cull those underperformers. But the best way to judge that is based on their average weight or their relative weight compared to a standard weight curve. So that's you're the guys that need that Excel spreadsheet to figure that out. Let's see, Jack Hamilton. How many pounds of bluegill can you catch or cull per acre per year? And that's gonna vary from pond to pond. If you've got a pond that's got great habitat for bluegill and your bass aren't culling them for you, It's okay to cull 30 to 50 pounds of bluegill per acre per year, but don't ever take your biggest ones. Now, there's times if your bluegill a little crowded that culling them actually creates more for the food chain. So when you start culling bluegill, especially if they kind of top off, if you look at your feeder and you see all the same size bluegill all the time and not a whole lot of wide variety in the sizes, then you probably should be culling a few bluegills. But never take your biggest ones. They're the ones that defend the nest. They're the ones that are going to help other bluegills get bigger, because the bigger your bass get, you need bigger bluegills. Now, I have found pretty much it goes hand in hand for a trophy bass lake. Trophy bass lakes have big bluegills, and that's pretty much the way it goes. Let's see. Hey, Chris says, I appreciate the great information Palmos provides. It's worth the $35. Yep, it is. Chris says, how many small bluegill will an average size bass eat in a day? I'm going to say an average size bass is 14 or 15 inches. If it has the chance, there's a good way to look at it. They'll eat at least 3% of their body weight every day. But bigger bass eat bigger meals. They might even eat 20% of their body weight in one meal. So that changes. Bluegills, I have actually looked at stomach contents of largemouth bass for one of the research programs we've done in the past, and have counted as many as 35 1 to 2 inch bluegill in the gut of where we flush them out. It's called lavage. We'll have a pump where we're pumping water out of the lake or out of a bucket down the throat of the fish to make them regurgitate into a filter, kind of a strainer. And there's been several times where we'll find 8 or 10 or 12, but one time I found 35 little bluegill in one bass. You know, and there's been times I find things like pieces of crawfish or a snake or a bird. They eat all kinds of weird stuff. Let's see, Benjamin Carvajal, in addition to healthy harvest, adequate habitat, diverse feeder species, how important is nutrient additives such as lime? Well, you know what? If your pH is low and your alkalinity is low, then you need ag lime. So water chemistry, you really need to start off by knowing your water chemistry. However, I've seen some of the best bass growth ever in lakes where the pH is 5.5 or 5.8, you know, which is pretty acidic, but the alkalinity is 22 to 25%. Parts per million. So that's pretty good. Let's see, Stephen Barker, can I get that spreadsheet? Yeah, email me, info@palmboss.com. John Taskett, getting my northern largemouth bass from Overton Monday. The smallest they have are 6 inches to 8 inches. Should I wait till I find fingerlings? 3.5 acre pond in Livingston, Texas. Okay, let me tell you this. Any fish hatchery right now that has 6 to 8 inch bass fingerlings have carried them over from last year. You've lost a year of growth. Because if you were to wait another 6 weeks and stock 2 inch fingerlings, they'll be in a properly stocked pond. They'll be 9, 10, 11 inches by November. So coming into the year next year, they'll be 11, 12 inches long. So if you buy those smaller fingerlings, they've been held that size in the fish hatchery because they have to get the numbers. But you basically lost a year's growth if you stock those. I don't want to beat Overton out of a sale because I love those guys. They're top of the line folks. You need to, but think about your goals. If your goals are, now of course with northern largemouth bass, they're going to top out in Texas probably 7 or 8 pounds anyway. Let's see, Leo says we've recorded up to 50%. 50% of what? Dave Glover, I missed something there, Leo. Let me know what we're talking about, 50% of what? Dave Glover, they love blue crabs too. Yeah, Dave did his PhD down in where there's a transition between freshwater and saltwater, where crabs come in and bass go out a little bit, and they'll eat blue crabs. We just don't have those in North Texas. Ben Strange, so my friend put me in charge of his 1 acre pond. They want to make it a fishing pond. Is it possible to grow big bass, big bluegill, and big catfish in a pond, in a 1 acre pond? Yeah, you just can't grow very many of them. You can't grow very many of them at all. You can grow more big catfish in a 1 acre pond than anything. You could probably grow 75 to 100 channel cat up to 10 or 12 pounds. But big bass in a 1 acre pond, you're probably going to have 50 to 75 pounds of bass in that 1 acre pond. That's going to be it. Okay, so Leon says 50% consumption of the relative weight during spawning season. I buy into that. Yeah, they'll eat half their weight through the course of 3 or 4 months. Especially small bass. But you got to keep in mind, if a small bass weighs a pound, he's half a pound of food. He's a long way from being 2 pounds. So through the course of the year, that bass is to get from 1 pound to 2 pounds has got to eat another 10 pounds of bait fish. So you can figure those percentages, and if you've got your timing right, where you've got your different fish spawning through the course of the year, and you're focused on forage fish, feeding forage fish, fertile water to grow more bait fish, to grow more bass, to grow bigger bass, that's part of the goal. Now, good gosh, we're 45 minutes into this, and I need to get into some more meat. Okay, here's the deal about giant largemouth bass. Once a bass hits about 3 pounds, it can eat anything in the pond, because that pond is going to be producing a lot of small bass. And that big bass, a big bass would rather have a big meal. So if you've got a 6 pound, 7 pound, 8 pound bass, they're going to be eating half pound, 3/4 pound, 1 pound bass. If you've got an 8 pound bass, it will eat a 1 pound bass. It'll eat 1.5 pound gizzard shad. And if you do the math, you can go from 8 to 10 pounds in 1 year. Maybe even faster. So, it's a big deal. Let's see. Hey, Steve Lewis from Hot Springs, Arkansas. Good to see you, buddy. Dion Parker, blueback herring. Now, that's a good point. The point there is, in different regions of the nation, there are different herring type fishes or shad. Look at what's native to your part of the country. Be sure that you understand those fish in order to diversify your food chain. That's a big deal. Kevin Briggs, what size bluegill is safe? Depends on the size of bass. I've seen a 14-pound bass choke to death, made me sick, on a 2-pound bluegill. So we lost 2 giant trophies in that particular lake. Now, I saw that in the early 90s. Haven't seen that very often. But a bluegill that's safe in a trophy bass lake is going to be 9 to 10 inches long. So part of your job is to keep having bigger bluegill available to be spawning and have more babies without the bigger bluegill getting eaten. We've got one lake that we're managing right now that we're having heck keeping big bluegill because it's got feed-trained F1 tiger bass in it and overstocked. So, they're feeding these big bass out of a bag, and they're growing so fast that they're overeating the food chain. So we're having to go try to find some 9 and 10 inch long bluegill, which is like trying to find a diamond at that park in Arkansas. Ain't likely, so we're having to do some culling of some bass that we ordinarily wouldn't. Do you ever stock, Kevin Brule says, you ever stock crawfish for bass forage? Yeah, I'll tell you why we do that. We will, now these are for folks that, there's 2 reasons to stock crawfish. Now these are for folks with a little bit deeper pockets. One reason to stock crawfish is to establish them, because almost every trophy bass lake I can think of has crawfish. We may never ever see a crawfish, but when we catch a bass with a crawfish claw sticking out of its tail, out of its gullet, while we're electrofishing, we know they're there. So job 1 to stock crawfish is to establish them. Now, stock crawfish that are native to your part of the country. Don't go get red swamp crawfish in Louisiana and haul them to South Dakota. It won't work. And even if they do survive there, they're going to displace native species, and that's a bad thing. I want to emphasize using fish that are endemic to that part of the country, any kind of aquatic species. The second reason to stock crawfish is to feed hungry bass during a lull in the food chain. And so crawfish are typically available at cheaper prices, like right now. Well, if you think about it, we're coming out of the winter. So the food chain has been as decimated as it's going to get. Bluegill are just now starting to spawn. Shad are just now starting to spawn. So it's going to be another month before that bait fish becomes significant. So what some landowners will do is they'll stock crawfish. We've even got a few clients that'll stock rainbow trout. Now what they do there is they know that a percentage of their bass are 3 pounds or bigger. So they want to bring some trout in that are so big that the smaller bass can't eat them, but the bigger bass can. And they'll stock them in like November, December, feed them some, and then when the trout start getting a little sluggish, the bass wear them out, which is now until about Memorial Day weekend. Kevin Briggs says, how many pounds of crawfish per acre? That's a back pocket judgment. Now I'll tell you this. We've stocked, I'm going to come in a couple of different angles there. Now, and before I directly answer that question, if you stock them to try to get them established, they either will or they won't. And you can stock them until the cows come home, and if they're not destined to establish in your pond, they won't. So how many pounds? If you're going to try to establish them, I'd say one sack, 25 to 32 pounds per acre is enough if you want to try to establish them. Now, we've got a client that we stock at least crawfish twice in the springtime. He wants 75 to 100 pounds per acre in a 10-acre lake. That's 1,000 pounds of crawfish twice. Now, the problem when you put that many is they hitchhike out. I mean, these guys are catching crawfish in their driveway 300 yards away. So if they don't get consumed soon, and they'll displace. They walk. Now, you guys may know about, Gary Schwartz, La Perla Ranch down around Laredo. He's growing some big largemouth bass. He stocked over 40,000 pounds of crawfish into 100 acres of water. I thought he'd lost his mind. I don't know how much it costs to do that, but he's also the guy that's got some hatchery ponds. And in Laredo, that's almost subtropical, South Texas. That's 500 miles south of us. He's got some hatchery ponds where he grows little bitty Macrobrachium rosenbergi, freshwater prawns up to about this size, and then just flushes them straight into the lake. But if he doesn't have a good culling program, if he doesn't have diversity of his food chain, if he doesn't have the right habitat, it ain't going to work. Let's see, Jack Hamilton, can I feed train my bass? My short answer on that is no, you can't. But my long answer is if you have the patience and a plan, you can feed train a few of your bass. And, that might be a subject for another topic. I've only got 8 minutes left here, and I got a few more things. Chris Blood says, Bob, there's so much to know about lakes and growing big trophy bass. What's the best way to contact you to arrange a visit to their lake? How about that? Plugging me, buddy. Plug you, plug me. I love it. Thank you. Or find someone you know in their area to get a professional advice and management plan. If I'm glad you asked that question. I don't ever think about plugging myself or anybody else. I'm just trying to share knowledge, but I'm glad you said that. Here's your answer. Pond Boss magazine in the resource guide, which is right here. If you don't have one, let us know. We'll send you one. It's also online at pondboss.com. Spend some time on the forum. But in that resource guide, we have vetted advertisers and vendors that know how to do these sort of things. So based on where you are, there are pros out there that will help you create a game plan for your lake. Every lake's different. Not every lake's destined to be a trophy bass lake. And we can kind of help you figure that out. Dave Glover says extension agents. Extension agents know some, but they have to have such diverse knowledge about everything from peach trees to honeybees, Now they do, extension agents do have resources, but I would put mine over theirs with Pond Boss. That sounds a little cocky, but I don't care. We do have some really, really good knowledge based in our Pond Boss organization. So if you want to send me an email, info@pondboss.com, right there, our cool little graphic, then I'll be happy to guide you to somebody in the Pond Boss fold with some of our vendors, some great biologists out there. I know a bunch of them, and they'd be glad to help. Now, I want to go back, since we have a few more minutes, and just talk about some of the traits of big largemouth bass. those largemouth bass. Now, when I say really big trophies, I'm talking about 10 plus, 11, 12, 13. 13 seems to kind of be the top limit for most normal lakes. Now, I'm not telling you can't grow a 14-pound bass, because a number of people have, and I get people telling me all the time that they do, but I don't see the pictures and I don't see them hanging from a scale. So I'm not going to dispute that, but what I am going to tell you is the traits. They have to have Florida genetics. Those bass will live 12 to 14 years typically. Now, it depends on where you are. Sometimes it's a little more time than that. Sometimes a little bit less. Shannon Kane, good to see you, buddy. But if a bass misses a meal, for the most part, it won't reach its potential. Now, here's what I mean by that. Now, there's some scientific differences with what I'm going to tell you. I'll hit that. I'll highlight that in a minute. But the longer your fish stay clogged up underneath 16 inches, the lesser the odds are that they're going to reach their true trophy potential. So that's why, like Dave was talking about earlier, harvest. That's a big deal. You know, now, if you have a 30-acre lake and you're harvesting 20 pounds of bass per acre per year, that's 600 pounds. That's almost 2 pounds a day. You know, and so that turns into work. You know, some guys are going to say, nah, we're not going to put that much work into it. That's why they don't have trophy bass. You know, so harvest is a big deal. Because what happens in most lakes is the bass will get up to be that 10, 12, 13, 14 inches long, and those are so competitive, little gang members pillaging the whole forage base, that they stop growing right there. So that's when you've got to be cognizant. Remember early on I said, job one is to get them to 16 inches. That means you need to be weighing and measuring bass by about 6 months after you're stocking them. Start looking at your growth rates. And by the time those fish hit 12 inches, 13 inches, you're going to see which ones are the ones that have the best chance in your lake and those that don't. You know, so get it going. Let's see. Dion Myers, how do I get some Florida bass in Indiana? I don't know that they live in Indiana. But I tell you what, send me an email. I'll connect you up with Matt Rail. He lives in Rushville. Got a fish farm there. If anybody knows how that will work. Now, I'm going to tell you what I think. I think you stand a better chance in Indiana than you would if you lived in, central Missouri or Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the reason is you have this little thing called ice. And an ice cover over a pond insulates the temperature. See, here in North Texas, we'll get water temperatures 33 degrees from top to bottom sometimes. You guys don't get that. So when you start having ice, then the odds are pretty good that if you've got water temperatures of 40 and above, you know, some F1 Florida bass might work in Indiana. The other thing I don't know is what the law says, because there are some states that won't allow you to bring an exotic strain. So check in with Matt Rail. Matt Rail watches these shows quite often. He's in the Pond Boss Resource Guide. Or send me an email and I'll put you in contact with him. Dave Glover, 2 foot average depth, ain't going to cut it. Nope, it's not. You know, big bass, they love to be a good part of the year in shallow water, off a point, with quick access to deep water. If you've got that, now deep water in a bass lake, I'd say you need a fair amount of water 10 feet deep to 15 feet deep. If you've got that, then you got much, much better shot at growing some big fish. Hello, Gary Stevens from down around the San Antonio area. Good to see you, Gary. Brian Lawrence, Jason Nipp said, how concerned should we be about koi fish in a 130-acre lake? Well, my best answer is not to worry about it. Now, I'm assuming that you have a healthy game fish population in a 130-acre lake. If you do, then koi are probably going to be another source of food for your biggest bass. Now, if your koi are in big numbers in a 130-acre lake, which I've never seen, then they could be a problem. But odds are not high for that to happen. If you've got good numbers of predator fish, largemouth bass, which I know you guys do, then I can't imagine koi are going to be a big problem. Brian Lawrence, will a higher relative weight fish drop over time, or just low relative weight fish stay low? I hear you say often to cull on relative weight based off the catch records, but how fast will relative weight start dropping in newer ponds? Weeks, months, a year? Most all of mine are 110% or more at this pond, 28 months. That is a fantastic question. Now, relative weight, if you want that Excel spreadsheet, I'll get that for you and tell you that. I'll wrap up this show with this answer. Your higher relative weight fish, as long as they've got plenty to eat, their relative weights will stay up. But when their density gets to the point where they're overeating the food chain, then their relative weights will start to go down. So keep measuring your relative weights. That's a big deal for trophy bass. Weigh and measure as many fish as you can, and when you do that, just trust me, you're going to get a good feel for what's going to happen. You can project. If you can project that your fish are going to lose weight, that's when you start adjusting your cull rates and the sizes of fish that you're going to cull. Great question. I'm glad you asked that. Shannon, is there a method to age bass in order to see if we've limited our gain? Odorless, yeah. Yeah, the best way to do that is with an odorless, but you got to have a diamond saw and got to have some special tools. If you'll scrape some scales off, put a little iodine dye, what is it? Oh gosh, I can't think of it. There's a betadine. If you'll squirt a little bit of betadine, look at it with a magnifying glass, count the rings, do that on 5 or 6 scales along the lateral line, average it, then you're probably going to have an idea of the age of those fish. Good gosh, what a fast-paced hour. Wow, thanks for joining. Hey, we're going to put this on YouTube. Remember, $35 a year for Pond Boss Magazine. We got all kinds of information. Your resources are our Facebook page as well as pondboss.com and the discussion forum at Ask the Boss. So thanks for checking in. Thanks for tuning in. We will catch up with you guys next week.